Hey guys, in this video I'm going to show you all the tricks I use to paint the most vibrant green suits of armor I've ever painted. Have you noticed that when you see minis from pro painters, their greens are so bright they almost hurt your eyes? But when you paint your greens, they seem flat and boring in comparison, and it doesn't matter how hard you try, you just can't get them to look that good. Let me quickly show you the progress I have made over the years in painting green to demonstrate what I mean, and then I'll show you all the tricks I have learned along the way using my last attempt as an example. Here you can see my green journey from boring olive green plague marines through increasingly more highlighted and vibrant hero models all the way to the last time I painted green on the channel, finishing my plague marine kill team. Those lads were nice and vibrant already, but when you compare them to the Maggotkin Blight Knights I just finished, you can see that they pale in comparison. So let me show you what makes the green on these Nurgle boys so much more vibrant and bright. And in this video I'll be focusing on the green armor, but I am planning another one about the corroded metals as well, which should be out in a couple of weeks. But if you want to know how I painted all the rest of the elements, there will be PDF guides and a ton of real-time footage on my Patreon, so check those out. Alright, let's paint some green, and I will be starting from a simple black primer, no zenithal highlight or fancy colorful underpainting with an airbrush this time. But that doesn't mean that we won't start with something fancy using the brush. The first step we will be doing is using king purple to base coat all the armor panels, and also all the stuff that will be bronze later, but that will be important in another video. This is actually the first little trick I'll be using to get that brilliant green end result. It might sound weird, but if you use only green colors, you will never achieve a truly good looking green. Fun fact, we'll be using only a single green color for painting these guys. So we start from purple because it's a fantastic shadow color for green, and if you want to learn more about these little color tricks, I have a video dedicated to this topic on the channel, so give it a watch. I try not to get this color on the rest of the elements, but otherwise I just quickly throw this on with a size 2 brush using 1-2 layers to get a nice full opaque coverage. This was quite easy, right? But now it's time to establish our light placement, and we will be doing it with ocean blue. And yes, I know this doesn't look like it will end up green by the time we finish, but trust me, it will. Basically what we are doing here is to create some color contrast between the blue and the purple in the shadows and the colors we will be using in the midtones and the highlights. And this contrast will help us make things look much more vibrant and bright. But the color contrast in itself is not enough. We need to also create contrast in value, which means that we need to have a big difference between the darkest and the lightest parts of the elements. And this sounds very complicated, but basically it goes like this. I'm edge highlighting every panel with this quite thickly. Then I cover around 80% of the panel with a solid highlight using multiple coats. The solid highlight will be our light area, and the part we leave darker will be the shadow, and the difference between the two will create the contrast we need. For this I imagine that the light is coming from above the left shoulder of the models, and I place these solid highlights where the light would hit them in this scenario, so mostly on the top of each panel and making them a little bigger on the left side. And in the shadow area that I don't fully cover with the solid highlight, I make some noise with scratches and dots using the tip of the brush. At this stage I'm not very precise or thin with any of this. Most of it will be either covered later on, or we will do more precise lines over it. But for now it will help us smoothing out the transition between the two colors. By the way, a little later we will talk about why we want to have the light hit the model from one side and not just from above, because it's quite important. When everything is done, I'll use the original king purple again, and I thin it down to a glaze with some extra water. It doesn't have to be super thin, but it has to be transparent enough to not fully cover what is underneath it. Something like 20% paint and 80% water will do. I glazed this over the border where I painted those scratches and dots, moving the paint from the blue highlight into the dark purple and ending my brush strokes there. I didn't try to fully cover the texture or create a perfectly smooth transition. At this point I was happy with a little more blending between the two colors and the nice violet tone it created over the blue. And here's the whole troop when this step was done. Very far from green for now, but we will fix that soon. Thinking about it now, this could also be a base for a pretty good looking blue color scheme, but maybe next time. The next color will be emerald, a more greenish tone, but still with quite a bit of blue in it. And I do the same thing as before, a solid highlight in the middle and scratches on the border. The only difference is that now I do it on a smaller area, only inside the previous highlight, making sure that I leave some of the blue and the violet I created previously still visible. At this point it's getting more important to be precise as well, so I'm using a size 1 brush instead of the size 2 I started out with. I like to start with bigger brushes and change them to smaller ones so I can be faster in the beginning and more precise by the end. And when I'm done, I use a little of the previous bluish color and king purple to glaze over the transition area. Once again, there is no need to spend a lot of time and energy on this glazing step, we will do something to fix it later. We don't really need perfect blends at this point, it's enough if we integrate the two colors and the scratches we made. And now is the time to finally use a proper green color, frog green in this case. And you could say that this is the most important color and step, so this is where we need to put in the most effort to get a good result result in the end. So it is also the time to switch to a smaller brush, this time a size 0, to make thinner and more precise lines. The basic method we use is still the same. Edge highlights, painting a solid highlight where we want the panel to be brightest, then scratches on the borders followed by a glaze to smooth things out. But now we introduce a couple of twists. I still do the edge highlights, but now I don't cover every edge, just the ones directly hit by the light. And this time when I glaze over the transition between the two colors, I do it with the same green color instead of the previous bluish ones. This is also where the light direction I mentioned before becomes more important. So I cover bigger areas on the upper half of the models than on the lower halves. For example, doing smaller highlights on the legs and bigger ones on the shoulders. And I also focus even more on one side of the models than on the other, and the reason for this is because I want to create even more dramatic contrast. Remember that we wanted to create this color contrast between the shadows, the midtones and the highlights? And on top of that, we also wanted to create contrast between the darker shadows and the highlights on each individual armor panel, right? Well, we want to go even further than that, and we want to create contrast between the darker lower side of the model and the brighter upper half. And that is still not enough. We also want contrast between the darker right side and the brighter left side. Basically, the more types of contrast we can create, the more dramatic, bright and vibrant the armor becomes. And this is not even the end of it. In a minute, we will add one more type of contrast to the list. Here is a model done in this step in the middle and two only painted in the previous steps, flanking him for comparison. You can see that this is the critical step where the armor turns green, and all the different contrasts we created already make the highlights shine. But that was already more than enough green for us, so now we move to basically a yellow color with only a little green in it. And as you can see with this, the color progression on the panels went from purple to bluish tones in the shadows to green in the midtones and now all the way to yellow in the highlights. And why do we do this? There are a couple of reasons. First of all, yellow is a fantastic highlight color for green. It also creates even more color contrast on the model. Now it's not just the green contrasting with the blue and the purple tones, but the yellow as well. And finally, this lets me add another type of contrast on the armor. Contrast between the cold tones in the shadows and the warm yellow tones in the highlights, and this will be the final contrast, I promise. And as for what we do with this color, I still do the same steps, but now with the size 00 brush and in a very small area inside the previous green. Now I only highlight the part of the edges that are the most in the light, and I focus most of my highlights in the biggest light areas. In some of the darker parts, like the underside and inside of the legs, I either don't use this color at all, or I just add some partial edge highlights, but no solid highlights. And once again, I use this color for the glazing step as well, but I am careful not to erase too much of the green since we still want the armor to read green and not yellow in the end. Speaking of glazing, before the final highlight we can do an optional step, and I will use the airbrush for this one, but you can easily do this with the brush as well, it will just take more time. I thinned this bluish green ink about 50-50 with airbrush thinner and I sprayed it at an angle from below into the shadows and slightly into the midtones. I did multiple passes to build up thin transparent layers. I didn't want to fully overpower the bluish tones in the shadows, just enhance them. The purpose of this is to smooth out the armor a little, especially between the midtones and the shadows. This is the reason I didn't spend a lot of time glazing between each step, since I knew I would be taking care of this at this point. And when you are painting 5 models, little shortcuts like this can save a lot of time and energy. The difference in the end is not huge, but the armor looks smoother and more cohesive than before. Alright, let's do the final step. I will use laser yellow for this, which is a super bright, almost fluorescent yellow color with a hint of green in it. I use this to paint some very small solid areas only in the biggest highlights, on the shoulder pads for example. But everywhere else I only did very thin and mostly just partial edge highlights, and the darkest areas I basically didn't even touch at this point. Here it is super important to be as precise and thin with our lines as possible, because the paint is so bright that every line we make will stand out a lot. So I go slowly and I use a small and sharp brush. Okay, everything is in place, but things look a little bit messy because I overpainted some of the surrounding elements while doing the armor. So I use black purple to correct all the little overpainting mistakes, but also to make sure all my dark lining inside the armor is intact and I have proper separation of elements for a good definition. I just recently made a video about this topic, so watch the previous video if you want to know more. And with that, our vibrant green armor is done and the end result looks like this. And with everything else painted in and the LEDs placed on a nice scenic base, they look even better. If you want to know how I painted everything else on them, you can check the guides on my Patreon, but I still plan to do another YouTube video about the corroded metals I painted on them. Also, let me know in the comments if you're interested in how I made and painted the scenic base, because I'm still considering if it's worth a video. But for now, I hope you have learned something while watching, and if you like the video, do me a solid and subscribe, like and comment. It really helps with the algorithm showing it to other people. And check out my Patreon for some awesome painting guides and long-form painting videos. And as usual, before I sign off, I wanted to thank my Patreon members for all their support. Without them, this channel would not exist, and that is especially true for the ones in the captain level. Thank you guys, see you in the next one.